Hey everyone, this is Rod White, and you're either listening to or watching The Rod White Bow Show. Hey everyone, welcome to The Rod White Bow Show. This podcast is going to be mostly about elk hunting. Lack of elk hunting.
Lack of elk hunting.
We're coming at you from Lolo, Montana. This is a hunting partner of mine, and I don't have very many elk partners. Now I've got officially maybe 4. But Michael Lloyd has done a podcast with me before in the past. If you go back in some of the earlier ones, where we talked about an industry job and relationship with his daughter and all that fun stuff. And today we're really focused on hunting, but there is some cool things that have happened. You talked about working your tail off in that podcast to get to where you were in the industry with some kind of an industry position.
Yep.
And now you're about ready to launch something.
About ready to launch, help start a new company, which we will be launching at ATA. And that's about all I could say about that.
Nice. So don't email me questions because I can't answer them.
If you know, the archery industry is pretty hush-hush, so I'm going to hush-hush.
Nice. That's exactly what the elk have done, too.
Yes, they have.
So we were, I don't want to say it's a unique situation, I guess, but it's definitely not, I would call it abnormal with our elk at this time period because, number one, we're sitting in the house. Obviously, it is September 22nd.
Yeah. Pretty much the peak of the elk rut, and here we are in my office doing a podcast.
Yep. I say a lot in my seminars when people ask about snowfall, cold temperatures, big fronts coming through. Whitetails and elk are a little bit different in this, in my experience. When we come into a weather system, elk hunting is off the hook. And then whitetails can be really productive depending on if that's an immediate transition like we just had. And I guess in some ways it's kind of similar. But there's always a period with that first snowfall for about 3 days where whitetails seem to shut down. Or, like I say all the time too, I may just not have it figured out when it comes to when that snowfall, what's happening. For the most part, they stop moving. With elk, you can still make things happen, usually. But in this case, we got freezing, rain, snow, wind, hail.
Everything. You know, and we didn't just get this weather through a period of time. It hit Thursday. Wednesday, pretty much the state of Montana was on fire. I mean, it's a severe drought. It's hotter than a pistol. Everything's smoky, on fire. Thursday, which was my very first day of vacation for the elk season, Thursday hit, and it is raining, snowing. I mean, it pretty much about put all the fires out in the state, and the whole storm covered the state. And so it's not a gradual get into fall.
Right.
It's summer, fall / winter within 2 days. So, and I don't know, excuse me, I don't know if that had something to do with what was going on or.
I'm going to say it did.
Yeah.
I just, it's been my experience in the past too with major fronts coming in when weather comes in, brutal weather like this, when there are rapid changes that elk will almost completely shut up. And this is the middle of where it should be prime breeding season. So to not hear bulls bugle at all for days on end, knowing full well they're there because you see the tracks. And we hunt a lot of open country. I prefer to hunt open country. I get more shot opportunities. In fact, the other day I was hunting some dense stuff and geez, couldn't get an arrow into one that I looked every way that I could to get an arrow around a tree limb, but I couldn't Michael Jordan it off a rock and get him in there. It just wasn't going to happen. So when weather like that changes with an elk, at least you can get on it, where whitetails you can't. And whitetails seem to I communicate a lot with them, but it's not necessarily all over the place. Like we were talking earlier about whitetails out here. And in some areas, you can go to southern Alabama, and communication with whitetails isn't going to be like it is in the Midwest, and it's not going to be like it is in western Montana or eastern Montana or wherever you're hunting them at. So elk, when they shut up, at least we have the opportunity to move on them and get in range. And the thing is with elk, it seems like that period of time that it takes for them to reacclimate and be okay with that again and go about their normal activities can be excessively long. And that's kind of what we're facing. That's why we're sitting here in the basement, because it's enough. I mean, we got brutally hammered out there with the weather. It's very difficult, and I have some of the best gear. Wearing Sitka exterior gear. You've got great gear. We had one guy that bailed right away on the mountain. You bailed on me in the middle of the night. I'm out.
I couldn't take it. It was, I don't even know what day it was, but I woke up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had standing water in my tent. I'd roll over. It'd go through my sleeping pad, sleeping bag. My clothes are soaked. My backpack was laying in a small lake in my tent. Everything I owned was wet, and so I just screamed over to you, Rod, I'm out.
Yep.
Sorry, brother, but I'm hitting the trail.
And I was like, I'm warm and toasty. I don't understand what the problem is. But the reality of knowing that the conditions were not going to improve for the next 4 to 5 days. I got up that next day, and I went out 4 different times, got out of the Kafaru, was going to climb up in there and go kill something, and 4 different times I got sent right back in. I didn't make it 20 yards, and it started hailing. I mean, just hailing, which are great stalking conditions if you know where they're at.
Yeah, and it was a little windy too, which also makes for good stalking conditions and stuff. But and that's what I was thinking too when I was in my tent. I wanted to try to, man up and sleep through it and hunt the next day, but everything I had was wet.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah, you're done. You can't dry out. And that's like when you go out in that conditions, you can only do so much.
Yeah, 2 days prior to that, I was completely soaked with someone else who was on with us, a friend, and we got wet. We were done. I mean, there was just there was no way he was going to stay there for sure. Yeah. And even me, I was, dude, I was in a wet sleeping bag. I was sleeping in water. And that's the importance of like a synthetic versus a down bag, for example. There's a lot of really highly technical stuff, and someday I'm going to do a podcast and lay all that stuff out in front of you guys and really explain the gear I have. But at this point, it's probably too late for anyone to really take advantage of going around and buy a bunch of gear this late in the season.
Yeah, it's kind of dwindling.
But we've got in Idaho, I've got an Idaho tag, and I've got an Idaho till the 30th. So I've got about 7 or 8 days, something like that. And I'm gonna head out tomorrow. I know you've got work to do with the new job.
Yeah, I gotta head back. My vacation's pretty much over, which it's a bummer for this year, but it is what it is.
So I'm back to solo hunting I'll probably hunt solid in Idaho and then move on over into Montana again. And I'll hunt in Montana till either tag out or season ends, one of the two. Yeah. And that's a long time period for a lot of people to get their head around, especially because a lot of the folks who listen to this are Midwestern hunters who are coming out elk hunting for the first time, and they have just like you, had a 6 or 7 day run or whatever it is that they've got that they can do, and that's it. And that sucks.
I did my vacation all around pretty much the peak of the elk rut. And first day of vacation, got hammered, and it's pretty much been snowing or raining, especially right around where we were hunting. It's been getting hammered.
You might get the sun for a couple hours and then get ready because you're going to get hammered.
Yeah, and it comes in quick.
Yep. And you just can't dry things out.
No.
And that's the biggest thing. Like, even I've got some great boots. Lathrop & Sons makes the boots I wear. And, dude, my feet were cold. And that was okay, I'm done. I'm up here by myself in pretty brutal conditions, and my feet were cold. And when my feet got cold, man, I get shut down. And I didn't have a pair of insulated boots, but they're dry. But even being dry, on cold rock surfaces, and they're just too brutal. Had to come out. Probably could have stayed in there if elk were bugling and moving. But the funny thing was, or not funny thing, it's exactly what we were talking about. When it snowed, and there was no more activity. Yeah. You walked across some of these areas that we know there were elk on both sides of a mountain that we were on, and you couldn't get close because it would rain and ice over top of the snow, and then it would snow on top of it, and then sleet on top of it. So it was cracking when you walked constantly. So there's no way you're going to sneak up on something.
No.
And you would have to know exactly where they were. And they were in heavy cover on north-facing slopes, but not moving.
No, and they really, from that one night that we did get out and we got into them, they were I don't know if I wouldn't call it call shy, but you started making some noise and they were gone.
Yep.
They were grabbing the cows and boogieing, so I don't know if it was just pressure or what, but yeah, it was tough conditions all the way around.
No full-out bugling, no keeping us up at night. Like the week before you started hunting with me, bulls were keeping me up all night long. This is some great hunting.
Yeah, you texted me at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, I kind of wish they'd shut up so I can get some sleep.
Right. But now that's not the case.
No.
Now, I will say that when this breaks, which this has been a good 5 to 6 day period at least,
something like that,
I would be willing to bet that, I can't say I'm going to be doing a bunch of posts because I don't know if I'm going to have service where I'm headed to. I hunt a lot of new areas all the time. I'm always moving. I like moving around. And I'll bet you that they'll be screaming their heads off. And that sun pokes out and things warm up a little bit.
Yeah.
They're going to be happy.
Yeah.
And
as long as you let me know while I'm at work.
I will. I'll send you short video clips. But what do you do when a situation like this? In this situation, it's the only situation I can really think of, honestly, where it's bailout time. And especially having extra time. Now, if you were locked in this time period, boy, I don't know that I have a solution for a guy without being able to sneak up on them and them unwilling to move and them completely shutting up and not wanting to talk at all. I don't know how you'd get in on something.
Unless, unless you know the area, I think, like the back of your hand. Like when the weather comes in, you know where they'll go. Even if they're not talking, you can try to slip in, take all day, 20 yards for every half hour, something like that, if you know they're in there. But if you hunt new areas and you bounce around and stuff, it's hard to really locate when they're not talking. And then you go scout and you go look around for them and you're bumping them. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, you don't want to run them out of the country.
No.
But so to help people out further this week that are out here or coming out here right now, there are all those factors that made everything difficult most of them are actually going to make things easy again now. And there's going to be some absolutes that are going to happen, I believe. One thing is when that sun comes out, it's going to happen tomorrow, Saturday. So I'm going to be out there. And I'll bet you almost everybody that has a daggum tag in their pocket that is remotely close to Montana and Idaho are going to be out there as well.
Yeah.
So you're going to have some serious increased pressure. That's something to consider, especially in the lower elevations. If you can get into higher elevations, where typically we find the elk this time, I'm not going to say elk are lower per se, but they weren't in some of the usual high basins they normally are in, and I don't have an explanation for that.
No, we've talked about that over and over, and like we were talking, I mean, there's so many variables with pressure, wolves pressure, the weather. I mean, I don't believe that the snow is deep enough really to push them down right now, but they're elk. I mean, they do what they do, and it's hard to say exactly why they weren't as high this year as they were last year.
One thing we talked about last night that was kind of cool, I was like, man, I wish we'd have done a podcast, since part of why we turned it on was we talked about the knowledge that people have of elk. And there are some guys out there who have phenomenal knowledge, obviously, like Corey Jacobson at Elk 101. I mean, I don't know the guy, but I've seen some of his stuff. He seems extremely knowledgeable. He's a world champion elk caller. And some of those guys that are out there that have that kind of knowledge, they may be more well-versed in what those animals are doing on a daily basis, but there are so many variables with an elk that are not present with a whitetail. Predator pressure being a huge part of that, whether they're communicating much or not communicating much in there. We saw a ton of wolf stuff on the ground.
And
not
a
cool.
lot of grizz.
I jumped a bear on the way into a bull and took the whole herd with it. I don't think I jumped those elk. I think I jumped that bear, and that track went on those bears, or that bear track went on for a while. We had a grizzly with 2 cubs up in there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of predator pressure that's not present with a whitetail that can cause them to move up or down or into and out of drainages. They seem to have a little different bedding habits than a whitetail, where a whitetail, for the most part, mature one, just needs the wind at his back where he can see out in front of him, and it's a dry condition that he's laying on. Where an elk seems like generally on north-facing slopes in really dark timber during the middle of the day, which is where I kill a lot of mine, because that's when the biggest opportunities are for me. The way I hunt, I don't call much. I'm not a champion elk caller. Don't ever profess to be. I'm just glad they respond to me, and all I need is 2 or 3 of those little screams at me, and I'm good.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, like, I don't know that there are a ton of people, especially that come out, Midwesterners, Easterners, Southerners, that hunt elk on, for a 1-week basis or 2-week basis, can understand that behavior, because some of these animals are traveling ridiculous distances. You mentioned the word migrating elk the other day, and it's like, it's funny because if you told me that based on the elk I hunt, I'd say I don't think elk migrate. You're like, they most definitely do. But it depends on where you're hunting them at. Some of them don't. I really don't think so.
They can. I mean, if you hunt over at the breaks, they don't migrate.
Right.
I mean, the breaks is the breaks. They're
not going to go anywhere because there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They might go out in the wide open stuff.
But if you're up in the, the high country and the, tree line and stuff, when snow gets 4, 5, 6 feet deep, they have to come down. Unless, and I've heard some of the big bulls will hang up higher and stuff like that. But for the majority of the elk, because we have our winter ranges around here that hold ton of elk that come out of, like the Bob Marshall, the Mission, stuff like that.
And I'm sure there's some biologists that'll disagree with me immediately on this, and that elk, they know what elk are doing all the time, because they probably do. They radio, collar, and whatever. But my term of a migration thing to me is like, let's all pick up and move, and we'll migrate back up to that same spot.
Yeah.
That I don't believe happens, at least not with extreme regularity. I'm not sure. Our conversation was, I'm not so sure that the same elk that we are hunting or the same elk that were here last year. And part of the reason I say that is because of the fact that we were up high hunting in the same area at virtually the same time. And where are those elk? It's not because of the snow, because I had a phenomenal week last year in October, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, and I was into bulls and shot a great bull. So, the behavior of those animals and being able to adjust or predict where they're going to be is difficult. And for those who haven't made it out yet and are planning on hunting out, you really need to understand that you could walk for weeks and never cut a track, never hear a bull bugle, and you could talk to a buddy who was in that same area a year before and be like, oh, yeah, there's full of elk up in there.
Yeah.
We ran into a guy this year that he's coming out of the mountains, and he's up there for a day. He's like, yep, no elk up there. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. He said, is he deaf? Is he blind? Or is he a liar?
He's one of those three. Yeah. And we found out at least number 3 was probably accurate. He seemed like a great guy, but just like every other elk hunter, you're not really telling the whole truth.
It seems like we didn't see a thing.
Yeah, we didn't see nothing except for when we crossed over this little saddle, and it looked like a kid's playground in there with all the tracks.
Yeah,
but it was the next day gone. Like you bailed in the middle of the night because of the rain situation with your year, and the next day we're completely gone. So what is the guy to do? Like now it's really is like starting all over again. And
especially for an out-of-stater.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can pour over maps all day long and have different areas and stuff. And, living here in Montana, I have spots that I've gotten into elk before. So if I'm going to go up whatever creek over here, I gotten some elk. Yeah, they're not there. I'll hit over here and check it out. There's no elk. Yeah. But, yeah, for an out-of-stater, it's definitely tougher.
Yep. So when you come out, you want to have a big list of places that you want to go hit because you just really don't know what's going to happen when you get here from a number of factors. It's just so different than whitetails.
Yeah. And it's like that first area that we hit that we went and scouted it. One day it was just raining and snowing and it was ugly. And so we'll take a drive. And so we got on the maps and tried to find a little spot, which we did, and went up in there or found out how to get up in there and then poured over, Google Earth and the Onyx app and all that stuff, and boy, it looked phenomenal. And then so we hiked in there a couple miles, and it sucked. It was horrible. So, I mean,
I don't think that was the term you used whenever I met up with you at the end of that day.
We got to keep this G-rated, but
yeah, you things can look good, and you can do all your research you want. We talked about a number of hunting services that are out there, and there's good and bad to them. The one thing about the hunting services is, and I won't mention any names on stuff or whatever, but it's funny because you can look at some units and you look all around the one unit border and it says 330 bulls are common in this area, and this one's 320 bulls, and this one's 360 bulls, and this one's 360 bulls. And then the unit you're in, it's 235. What? Like, did somebody forget a 3 in there? Or, and you got to remember that everybody else is looking at the exact same information. And I don't know how many members there are of some of those sites, so it's hard to say. There's a lot of great information put out there. Randy Newberg, who I don't know, but seems like a great guy, puts a ton of information out there. He talked about flying in a helicopter into private zone or public zones inside of private zones, I believe it was, on the breaks, for example. And I am not kidding you. I've talked to 3 people who've hired a helicopter pilot now. So what does that mean? It means that you're going to have an increased amount of pressure in those places where you're being told to go, which is why, honestly, like for me, I move around a lot, so I'm not overly concerned that somebody hunts the same spot I do, because I'm generally probably not going to hunt it again. Yeah. Probably. And that's what's cool about draw units, but in general, over-the-counter units, which is what I hunt and you hunt, boy, that information that is kicked out there, it's heard by a lot of people. And so you got to remember that too. Like, that's something to take in consideration.
It's definitely a double-edged sword. I mean, you hear it on a podcast or you research it online and someone's doing the exact same thing you're doing.
We sat in the hotel room when we'd met you and a buddy that we're hunting together. And when we met you, I was like, I wonder how many other people have the exact same plan going over the exact same area right now. Yeah. And I don't know if it was you or him giggled. It's like, whatever. Dude, when we go up there, here's a guy all dressed to the Kuyu Nation ready to rock it. I'm going, what the? Yeah. We didn't see anybody in there last year.
No.
I'm like, well,
No,
that guy
we were
was
in
sitting there thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah. Last year was awesome year. I mean, they were all running, screaming all over the place, and we were alone.
Yeah.
For that whole basin.
And here we come to find out his buddy had shot a bull up in there already on opening weekend or the second weekend, and that doesn't change the way I hunt or anything like that. But to find the areas, like Randy's got some great information on how to find some of those areas geographically on Google. I know he's got a whole Google Earth series, and that helps a lot. But you got to find water, even though it's just rained. How much? And snowed, which it hadn't for a long time. You've got to be in water. So you want to look for, number one, places where you've got water. Number two is your access, which is, this is kind of common information for most people, but some people may not know. So share it, I guess. Look for that access that is very limited. Yeah. And sometimes that can be like, I found a spot 2 weeks ago I liked a lot that was brutal to get into, but it was only about 1.5 miles from the nearest parking area. And there might be a little easier way to get in there. I'm going to find out here in a couple of days. But it was so brutal to get into that, that guy I was on was like, dude, I'm ready to kill you. I was going to turn around and go right back to the truck.
Yeah, you did text me. He's going to kill me. I think he's going to kill me.
There were a lot of 4-letter words flying all the way up that mountain. And it was rough and steep. And then it just, boom, opened up. And it's phenomenal hunting. But I think partly because it's really tough to get in there.
Yeah. So
you want to look for your access roads, and some roads will be closed here probably. I don't know if they still, I don't know how long that goes on for, but with the fires, a lot of things were closed.
Yeah. Yeah, the fires really, gosh, there's guys I work with that their whole hunting area is shutting down. I mean, they couldn't get in there, and they're scrambling trying to find a new spot.
So you've got a lot of pressure that's moving in, human pressure that's moving into areas that it's not normally into. One of the guys made a comment when we took Paige's, I think it was Paige's bull or Lexi's, or I don't know if it was a bull or who else we took in. But the guy made the comment that, man, we're going to get pounded this year with the hunters. That's for sure, with all the meat coming in. I'm like, oh, why? And he's just because of the smoke. Everybody will be down here hunting in rifle season. Yeah. Well, smoke's gone for the most part that I know of. So I don't know how true that is, but it probably definitely had an impact because I know from a physical conditioning perspective last year, you seem to be in a lot better shape, although you look like you're in the same shape you were in last year, but it prevented you from getting out this summer as a Montana resident.
Yeah, it was tough this summer trying to hike around or right outside of Missoula. We have the M, and last year, I'd take my backpack, load it up with a bunch of weight, and my daughter and I, we'd up and down, but gosh, this year, you just go outside. I mean, it's hard to mow the lawn without hacking.
Because of the smoke.
Yeah.
So that's influenced human pressure. So, again, you want to eliminate human pressure, find water. Burns, I know some guys are really big into burns, which is pretty much most of the state now.
Yeah. The state's going to be good hunting.
But the thing to remember is that animals don't magically appear because there's been burns. They still have to be born. And you're hunting animals, in theory, if you're hunting mature bulls, like I like to, and I like meat too, but I want mature bulls if I can. They're not. They take 4 to 5 years to grow. So when you're looking at these burns, they also take 3 or 4 years to mature. It doesn't. A lot of people talk about some of these features like elk will magically appear of an age structure that's a trophy class quality, and you're just like, woo, this is gonna be awesome because all these burns. So you got to keep some of that in mind. I imagine some animals died in those fires.
I'm sure.
I think somebody told me they saw a Facebook feed of a mountain lion that was like a crispy critter in a tree.
Yep.
So that's going to affect your population. So one thing when you're out here, whether or not you get into elk, if you're researching some areas for the next few years in Idaho or Montana, I can't speak as much to Colorado because I haven't been there for a while. I know there's a lot more elk there. But keep in mind, keep logs on where you're at specifically so that you can remember where some of those features are. Now, Onyx Maps has those new features that show fires, but I can tell you firsthand that some of the Onyx Map stuff, or the Onyx Map stuff we had, there were fires in areas where they weren't on the map, and there were some that were marked that should have been there, but I didn't see them. Like, wow, I can't believe there was a fire there 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're probably going off of U.S. Forest Service maps, and I can't imagine some of those are inaccurate, but we found some inaccurate information here and there, just like with some of the membership apps. You just have to be aware of the fact that you're going to have to work your tail off to find out a lot of that information on your own, and those things are beginning guides. I just don't want anyone to think like, oh, I signed up for this, or I followed these rules, and I'm going to just waltz right into a bunch of elk.
It don't happen that way.
Cool. I don't know. Any other things, I guess, you'd mention coming into this week that would be valuable for those that are coming in from an out-of-state perspective?
As far as elk? It should hopefully start getting better. The weather's supposed to clear up. The temperature's supposed to go up a little bit. So they should be on their feet. I mean, and if the weather has put them down. And I don't know how much movement. I know it shut them up, but as far as the movement, I don't know if it really limited their movement a lot or what, but they should be running around and hopefully screaming.
I would say in those drainages, they get up in the middle of the day and move around some.
Mm-hmm.
But the movement from drainage to feeding areas or wallow type areas, that was non-existent at times.
Yeah, they might just hunker down, still move, but stick closer to the heavy timber, the dark wood, stuff like that, and so which will be harder to see. But hopefully they'll be out there running around like a bunch of school kids.
Yeah, and call-wise, you're moving into a time where they're going to, in my opinion, in my past experience, they're going to stop. Not that they were doing this past week because of the weather, but they're probably going to slow down or limit. You're going to be limited on how much you're going to be able to communicate with a bull and have them come running to you now.
Yeah, we found that out last year. The elk that we were after and that we were hunting, they would bugle all night, all day. I mean, I can't believe that they could still bugle as much as they did.
Yeah. You didn't even need a bugle tube.
No, and we didn't call. We couldn't call because, we could, but the bulls were with the cows, and they would lay there, and they would sit there and bugle, and it's like they would just scream at each other, but nobody was really doing anything.
You could get them to respond, but they weren't just going to get up and come rolling into you. And I would say, too, that we're dealing with the elk that we're dealing with, for the most part, are in a little more open areas, and they can see. And if they don't see what they're looking for, something's talking at them, it seems like they're just like, whatever, I don't have time to even. And maybe my calling skills need a bunch of work.
I know mine do.
But I just don't know that you can. There's probably some kind of a certain sequence you can hit or trigger an emotion that's going to pull one off a herd like that. But this week in particular, in years past, going into this third week kind of thing, as you're kind of coming off the tail end of what should be the majority of the breeding, those elk are not going to be paying a whole lot of attention to you specifically trying to call them off. I mean, unless you can convince them you're one hot cow. But these little herds that are scattered in a lot of places right now will start to converge into bigger herds in the next week or two. And if you're coming to hunt this week, in my opinion, you've got a great opportunity coming up because of the horrible weather we've had. We've got a big break. There's probably a lot of bulls that made it through that wouldn't normally make it through, even if they may be smaller satellite bulls where guys would have shot them. Your population's up, but you're also going to have a lot more hunting pressure. So you're going to have to, I think, in my opinion, really concentrate on making certain that you're finding stockable situations for those animals where they're going to bed down during the day and then get in close. You might cow call a couple in, but for the most part, I think you're going to have to treat them as if they're not something that's callable. Yeah,
and you also are going to have to watch too with the weather, because it is supposed to get warmer. So during the day, it is going to melt that top layer of snow, and at night it's going to freeze it.
Crunchy.
So it's going to get crunchy. So you're just going to have to go slow.
Yep.
Super slow.
And definitely in the mornings, like we did last year quite a bit, not because of the snow, but we just did, and we're really effective in an area where bulls were not responsive to the calls. A lot of glassing, getting up in the morning. In fact, we pitched the old Kafaru up right where you can see in the morning when you wake up and just watch them. And I'd watch them till they bed, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning.
We kind of hunted them like mule deer.
Yeah.
We just sit there and watch them do whatever they do in the morning, yelling and screaming, and till the herds would go off and bed down in these little pockets, and then we're just trying to ambush or sneak in there or do whatever, because calling wasn't effective, so had to get in close somehow.
Yep. So, I don't know. I guess that's about all I can really add to it. There's not a whole lot else that...
No. There's so many... Gosh, we've been talking the last few days, and there's just so many variables that you try to narrow down what exactly is going on right now, and it's really tough.
Yeah. And it's very difficult, quite honestly, listening to a lot of other people on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and they're talking about how things are working for them. And it's... Dude, that might not be happening where you are.
No.
I mean, if you're listening to somebody in Colorado talk about their hunt, dude, I don't think they're experiencing the weather we're experiencing.
No.
Or Northwest Montana, you're probably in a little different category of weather than where we're in Western Montana as far as weather goes, and maybe they're doing something completely different.
Yeah.
So you've got to be adaptable.
Well, it's also like we were talking about the whitetail. The whitetail over here in Western Montana are totally different than I went and hunted Wisconsin for whitetail, and they're the same animal basically, but they're almost like two different beasts.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I'm sure the elk are a lot of the same way.
I think we'll have to do a podcast about Western whitetails out here. It'd be fun.
Yeah, I'd like to, because I know zero. I hunt them every year, and it's,
Well, for a lot of you guys, you put so much energy into the elk hunting, which totally get, because I'd way rather eat elk than deer.
Yeah.
But you put so much energy into it that I think a lot of guys do their whitetail hunt stuff just kind of on the weekend and in the evenings, and nobody takes off out here hardly for whitetails.
No, not really. You know, you'll go, a lot of the rifle hunters and stuff, because the rifle season is open during the rut. So you'll, your family or whatever, your buddies, you'll head over east, hunt mule deer. As far as the whitetail, I really don't know too many people that will take off the whole, the week of the peak of the rut here strictly for whitetail. They'll go over for, mule deer and stuff like that, hit the breaks, or some of the big ranches over east and stuff like that. But
whitetail season coming up pretty soon for most of us. Get through this elk season. I may hang out in Montana because the season goes till the 15th, and maybe even spend an extra day or two with you here, chasing whitetails a little bit with you and kind of showing you some of the ropes, I guess, of the stuff that I know that's effective, even out here, because we guide a little bit on the Milk River. So, but they're definitely different than at home in the Midwest. So we might touch on some of that, see how it goes, and see how the season goes. Hopefully I'm going to be busy packing out elk by myself, because I'm solo from now on, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So
it stinks, but I got to go back to reality.
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's been a good time.
Yeah, and good
thanks
luck
for the
with
barbecue last night, too. That was good.
Oh, yeah, I should have posted some. Maybe I'll post an Instagram pic of that here shortly.
That was good stuff.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to hit the garage, repack, and everything's all dried out again, and hit the road here tomorrow morning. And
I think I'll probably fix the leak underneath the sink that happened while I was elk hunting. So, yeah, Good times.
Peace out, everyone.
All right, see ya.